Imagine following someone who knows the road leads to suffering and watching him walk ahead anyway. In Mark 10:32-34, Jesus doesn't drift toward the cross or get swept up by events. He leads the way to Jerusalem, fully aware of everything waiting for him. And he lays it all out to his disciples in startling detail. Let's read verse 32 from the English Standard Version. "And they were on the road, going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him." There's so much to see here that it should be 3 verses. First up, Jesus and his followers are in transit, headed up to Jerusalem. The phrase "up to Jerusalem" was, and is, common in Jewish culture. It was true in a geographic sense, as well as a religious and governmental sense. Jerusalem is at a higher elevation than the areas of Jesus' ministry. It's also the capital of government, but most importantly, it's the location of the temple, the epicenter of the Jewish religion. So, going up to Jerusalem was a big deal. In Mark's Gospel, this marks a move toward the climax of his story of Jesus. Next, Mark tells us that Jesus was walking ahead of the rest of the group. The Greek word that Mark used is proagon, and it means to be out in front or to be in the lead. Why does that matter? Mark paints a picture of a Jesus who is walking to Jerusalem with a focus and determination. A first-century audience would recognize that in his word, choice, and verb tense. And we can get a sense of this from the 2 reactions that Mark describes. Next, we're told they were amazed. Who is Mark talking about? He doesn't say, but we can deduce from the next part that it was the disciples of Jesus who were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. So along with the official group of Jesus' personally selected disciples, there were other people following along too. And the 2 groups had 2 different reactions. The disciples were amazed or astonished, and the others who followed were afraid. But why these strong reactions? Consider the scene. People see a man they believe to be the Messiah. He's headed for the national and religious capital of Judaism. He isn't meandering or strolling. He is leading the way in a visibly determined fashion. This has all the signs of an imminent showdown between the Messiah and the existing power structures. If you're a close disciple, you may think your master is about to reconstitute the kingdom as it was in the days of King David. If you're following along and you haven't heard what Jesus has told the insiders, you may fear for his safety if he confronts the people in power. Remember, not too long ago, John the Baptist spoke plainly to the powerful and lost his head. After we're told about the reactions of these 2 groups, Mark tells us that Jesus once again segregated the 12, the apostles, and for the 3rd time explains to them what was going to happen to him in Jerusalem. Let's look at verse 33, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles." What makes the 3rd time different from the other 2 times Jesus told them this? Most importantly, it is now imminent. They are on their way to Jerusalem right now. Also, this time he includes more specific details. So what will happen in Jerusalem? The Son of Man will be delivered. Jesus again applies the messianic title from Daniel chapter 7 to himself. Jesus is saying that what is about to happen is Messiah business, and not simply about his teaching, miracles, and influence. The word delivered literally means handed over, and implies betrayal. Yet he's enthusiastically headed up to Jerusalem. To whom will the Messiah be handed over? To the chief priests and the scribes, to the religious authorities of Judaism. So what? Why does that matter? Because the conflict is a religious one between the leaders of the Jewish religion and the Jewish Messiah in the capital of Judaism. How will Jesus fare in this conflict? He plainly says that the chief priests and scribes will condemn him to death and hand him over to Gentiles to carry out the sentence. This is very important. The sin problem and the redemption of sinners to reconcile them with God are not limited to the Jews. The culmination of the Messiah's mission will involve Gentiles too. Specifically, the Romans embody secular authority in the world. In a very real sense, a union of church and state condemns and executes the Messiah. Let's move on to verse 34. And they will mock him, and spit on him, and flog him, and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise. Jesus tells the 12 that the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities will do 4 things to him. All 4 are humiliating and denigrating. They will mock him, meaning they will belittle him based on his identity, position, and characteristics. They will mock the Messiah for claiming to be the Messiah. They will spit on him, which is a sign of disdain in virtually every time and place. They will flog him, administering physical abuse and punishment, to shame him in the eyes of his followers. And finally, they will kill him. What could be more discrediting of one claiming to be the Christ than his followers witnessing his death? But Jesus isn't done. After this horrific list of things that will be done to him, he makes a simple, matter-of-fact declaration. And after 3 days, he will rise. Mark has now told his readers that Jesus was fully aware of specifically what awaited him in Jerusalem. And he also told us that knowing all this, Jesus was fearlessly, enthusiastically leading the way up to Jerusalem. What are the lessons of this short passage? Perhaps of most importance, Jesus was not a victim. He described it in detail and marched toward it with vigor. The next lesson will be fully fleshed out in the next video, when James and John ask Jesus for the right and left-hand seats in his kingdom. They weren't talking about a heavenly kingdom. They were thinking about this trip to Jerusalem. Even his close disciples could not replace their preconceptions and assumptions with his plain words. That is a risk for everyone. And finally, you cannot follow Jesus and avoid his cross. Christ marched into suffering and death, and emerged from the tomb victorious over the power and consequences of sin. The road to the messianic throne led through suffering and death. And after 3 days, he rose. Whether you find his words in this passage amazing or frightening, don't lose sight of his determined march up to Jerusalem, knowing full well what to expect there. Next time, James and John ask an absolutely crazy question. Don't miss it. Thanks for studying with me. Please tell your friends about this channel.